Hi everyone, and thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, even if it is virtually, at the Townsville Big Ideas Summit. My name is Joel Speranza. I'm the head of mathematics at Ormiston College. And like most of you, my school went through a pretty dramatic shift last term when we went to online learning. So this talk is called Pandemic Pedagogy and what comes next. Because I know that was a pretty stressful time and we haven't had much time to breathe, but I hope that we can learn something from it and bring it forward into our schools in the future. But before I get to all of that, I want us all to cast our minds back to the before times. A sweet time when all of us were young and carefree and nobody was thinking about COVID-19 and nobody was thinking about online learning. Now, at the time, there was a weekend. I went down to Stanthorpe, my hometown. I went to a great festival. It's so awesome. They only do it every 2 years. It's called the Apple and Grape Festival. And I was having a fantastic time, and I was silly enough to check my phone, and there was an email from the boss that said, on Monday afternoon, we need to have a meeting because we need to start talking about a potential shift to online learning. Now, I remember that Monday afternoon meeting very, very well, and some of the phrases that were bandied about in that meeting looked something like this. If we close, if we teach online, what happens if? Now that meeting was great and lots of great ideas were thrown around and we left after a pretty long meeting, and then about 48 hours later we all met in the same room again, and these phrases I heard again with a slight difference. When we close, when we teach online, what happens when? And from that moment, we really went into overdrive. We started communicating with parents, with staff, with students. We started doing a lot of professional development. We started creating resources. We moved to online learning and we started doing some online lessons. The goalposts kept shifting. We were moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour, teaching online, iterating as we went. It was hectic. 6 weeks of online learning, 6 weeks with very, very little sleep, and then it was over. The kids were back. We were teaching in classes again. We were reconnecting. It was time to start talking about assessment for the term. It was time to start talking about reporting for the term. And before you knew it, it was the June-July holidays. And if you're anything like me and many of my colleagues, the June-July holidays is where you slept for approximately 3 weeks, and now we're back. We're in Queensland. We're working on the new senior syllabus, preparing for external exams. It's still go, go, go. And that's where we are today. Now, barring some very fancy Einsteinian relativistic physics type stuff, time moves at the same speed all of the time. But I think we can all agree that if time is a river, then the river has been flowing faster than normal. We might need a bit of a life raft. Now, I'm suggesting that at some point in the future, it's time to get out of that river, stop, look back, take stock and see what we did right, what we could have done better, and probably most importantly, what we can take moving forward in our school. But before I get to the lessons part, I really want to talk more about how Ormiston College actually approached that online learning thing. Because thousands of schools in Queensland, thousands of schools in Australia, and we all approached it slightly differently. Now, I didn't want to spend a long time on this, but I have been reading the news lately. COVID-19 seems to still be swirling about, and maybe we might go back. Now, excuse my drawing, but this is me in my car, and this is COVID-19, and I really wished it was true that COVID-19 was firmly in our rearview mirror. But I am very worried that it looks a little more like this. COVID-19 feels like a reckless driver in the lane right next to us, and you're eyeing them suspiciously, hoping that they don't decide to merge without indicating. So, I am going to take you through what we did a little bit just in case that merge does happen, you might be able to take something away from it. So when it came to learning from home, our approach was blending what was already familiar with the new stuff of online learning. So we're a Microsoft Showcase school, so we're very lucky that our students and staff are already used to working with Microsoft OneNote and Microsoft Teams. So we used that as, I guess, our content delivery system. Now, you might already remember that way back then, all of Ed Queensland started using Microsoft Teams and OneNote as well, and there was some stuff in the news about those things crashing or not syncing. Luckily, because we were already using them, all of our OneNotes had already sunk, so we were right to go straight out of the gate. So we're using those familiar tools as our learning management system, and from the get-go, we really wanted the pedagogy to be rock solid, something that a student could engage with flexibly. So that meant sort of leaning on what on the surface looks like an asynchronous model. And so that looks something like this. Staff would generally create videos of explicit instruction, introducing a new topic, discussing something the students were about to engage with. That would be embedded in their OneNote, uploaded to YouTube so that they could easily access that. Now that video was embedded in their OneNote, and then it would lead them either to doing some individual learning or lead them into doing some collaborative learning, and students might bounce backwards and forth between these two things. So they might do some individual learning and then share something in the Microsoft Teams space, or they might share something in the collaborative space of OneNote. They might make a little video in Flipgrid, and then they might go back to doing some individual learning as well. From there, teachers would give students an opportunity to show some evidence of learning, some sort of activity where students would be showing that they had engaged with this and understood. Now, evidence of learning is not the same as evidence of work, and that was something we continually learned throughout this process. Showing that they had learnt what was important was really the foundation for what we were doing. Now, obviously, this is a cycle, so you can cycle back from there, and to there somewhere. So that was how our 6 weeks of learning looked for our students. And we gave our students a lot of freedom with this. And the way that we gave them that freedom was to create that learning sequence for a full week and then give the students that full week of work on a Friday in a document that looked something like this. Now, this document was sent to parents and students, and parents and students could see what was expected for maths that week, what was expected for science. Just a small summary. Obviously, the meat of it was in OneNote and in Teams. Now, this kind of freedom for students to manage their week is a big release of responsibility onto the students, but the teachers were there every step of the way in Microsoft Teams, checking up on students, messaging small groups of students, individual students. I haven't seen any evidence of work yet in your OneNote. Could you explain this to me? So there was a constant checking of feedback from staff through students throughout that week. Now, you might be thinking that that is an extraordinary amount of work to create that level of online resource for every class. And you are correct, it does take a fair bit of work to put that content together. So we drastically rethought our staffing for this period of online learning. So here you can see what the maths staffing looks like when we're face-to-face. 38 classes, 12 different teachers. Each letter is a different teacher. Teacher A, Teacher B, Teacher C. Now, when we moved to online learning, the need for those classes changed, and we moved to something that looked a bit more like this. 1 class per year level, a Year 7 class with 149 students, and 1 teacher looking after those students. Now, once they've created the resources, they are looking after those students, checking in on them over and over and over again. And you might think that sounds like a lot of students for 1 teacher to deal with, but that's about how many students you deal with face-to-face. But you only have 1 content area to deliver, not the 5 content areas traditionally that a maths teacher might have. Interestingly, teachers said that the 149 students in Year 7 they had, or in Year 9 that they had, they got to know those students really, really well over the course of those 6 weeks because they were in constant communication, getting constant feedback on students' learning and giving constant feedback on students' learning. Now, of course, you might look at all of what I've said so far and say, but what about live, face-to-face communication? We introduced that in our second week of online learning, 1 hour a week per class. Now, that looked very different depending on the classes. So for a Year 7 maths class, it might have looked like 149 students doing a Kahoot and reviewing the previous week's work. For smaller classes, it might have looked like a group discussion. That added to the experience, but the backbone really was that solid, high-quality, asynchronous content delivery that we had poured a lot of time into. Now, that was our approach to online learning, and I'm sure that some of the ideas that I've shared there, you might think they're great, you might disagree with them, you might have questions about them. I'm very sorry I'm not there to answer them in person today. What I would like to do, though, is pause here for 120 seconds and give you a chance to turn to your neighbour, introduce yourself if you haven't already, and have a conversation about what I've shared there, our approach to learning from home, what you liked, what you disliked, what you've got some questions about, some of the roadblocks that you think we might have faced and how we might have overcome them. All right, I'm just going to stand here, catch up on my reading. I've got a fantastic textbook I can have a read of, and I'll catch you in 120 seconds. All right, so that's been about a minute there, about a minute to go. About 15 seconds, time to start wrapping up those conversations. I'm going to start talking again soon. All right, thank you very much. I hope you had some good conversations there. I hope you'll continue those conversations when I'm done talking here. I want to move away from our approach to learning from home and really talk more now about what we learned and what we hope we can bring into our regular classrooms, into the regularity of school life moving forward. So in no particular order, the lessons learned. The first one I think is a big one, and it's not something I believed up until now. Schools are incredibly agile organisations. Now, this is not something I would have said previously, but taking an enormous organisation and moving it from face-to-face teaching to online learning like that, that's agile. Now, previously, I would have thought a school was more like, say, a cruise ship. And if you've ever been on a cruise ship, you'll know the turning circle on one of those things is incredibly slow. If you want to take a cruise ship and turn it around, it's going to take a while. But instead, I now understand that schools are more like one of these old-timey Viking ships. Now, these Viking ships, you can turn them on a dime, and the reason that you can turn them so quickly is the oars here. Now, everyone in the boat, in the school, if they are all working together, they can turn that boat around, turn that school around really fast. Rowing forwards, rowing backwards, and around we go. Now, to do that, everybody's got to have a clear idea of where they need to be going, and we need to have a singular purpose. And that's what online learning gave us. But we can create our own singular purposes and turn our schools around and use the agile nature of our Viking boats to our advantages. Now, the second lesson I learnt is that a good plan violently executed is better than a perfect plan executed next week. George S. Patton said that. Now, this is something that I think schools often have trouble with. Obviously, we feel an incredible sense of responsibility to our students, so we want to give them the best that we can. And often that manifests itself as people standing in rooms, having meetings, having committees, and trying to come up with the perfect plan so that when they institute it, it is the best that we can possibly provide to our students. But every day that you spend planning your perfect plan is a day that your students aren't receiving your perfect plan. So instead, I suggest a good plan. Make a good plan, institute it fast, and then be agile and change it and iterate it as you go. It may never be the perfect plan, but a good plan now is touching the lives of our students today. Now, to institute these two things, you really need to start rethinking professional development. Now, a day like today is great where a bunch of like-minded people can spend some good time together discussing educational ideas and presenting ideas to each other. But when you're in the midst of changing as fast as we did, large portions of time devoted to professional development is really, really difficult. Ormiston College got around this by doing professional development on the fly. Every day of the online learning process, a 3-minute professional development video was getting made and sent to all staff every morning. 3 minutes here and 3 minutes there. That video was then uploaded to a website where teachers could go and rewatch it when they needed that information. That professional development covered things like the technical aspects of online learning, but it also tackled more meaty topics like what is good feedback in online learning, the pedagogy of online learning. Small chunks every day, using an asynchronous approach to professional development rather than devoting those large chunks of time when you can. You can do professional development whenever you want. Now, I know you all know this. Students want to learn. But I think this move to online learning for us really pushed the point home that our students were hungry for knowledge. They wanted to do this stuff. Now, you might have an anecdote about little Billy who didn't do anything during online learning, but that's an anecdote. The vast majority of students were logging on, were working independently. In our school, they were self-regulating and really setting their own path and learning the work. When they got back, we didn't feel like we were behind because our students had been engaging with that learning. So I would suggest if we keep this front of mind, we can really start looking at redesigning the way that we set up our classrooms. And we can start giving more control to our students over their own learning rather than trying to control or micromanage them as they go. And finally, I think the last thing is that we can do it better. While we were in online learning, we were constantly iterating and constantly improving our process, and I think that we can do the same thing in our own classrooms now. I think that we can take all of the things that we did in online learning, see what worked, see what didn't, re-examine the things we do today, and start from the understanding that what we're doing today can be improved and finding the ways to improve it. So I do hope that we now get some time to stop, take stock, look at what worked, look at what didn't, and then take it forward for the benefits of our schools and, most importantly, for the benefits of our students. Thanks very much for having me. Enjoy the rest of your day.